12 years after my husband died, my small apartment still had only the sound of the clock and my shadow on the wall. I thought loneliness was the greatest fear of old age until I realized my son no longer saw his mother as part of his family. Short phone calls, polite pecks on the cheek, everything reduced to courtesy. Then one day, a lawyer called to say I'd inherited $5 million. I went silent, not because of the money, but because of one thought that flashed through my mind. If I had nothing, would Lucas still open his door to me? That evening I called him, pretending to choke up as I said I'd lost everything and was about to be evicted. He answered immediately, voice sweet like when he was little. "Come over, Mom. I'll get the room ready." But the next morning, when I pulled my suitcase up to his front door, there was only a red for sale sign stuck in the lawn, and I understood. Sometimes the most expensive lesson doesn't come from loss, but from the person you believed would never hurt you. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Sandra Whitmore, 68, widowed for more than a decade. I live alone in a small third-floor apartment in the Northview complex on the north side of Street Paul. Every morning I make myself a cup of black coffee, sit by the window, and watch the sunlight fall across a street covered in dry leaves. Everything repeats like an old tape. The kitchen is still clean, but there's no warmth here except mine. My husband, Richard, died of heart disease just after we celebrated our 40th anniversary. I thought I wouldn't survive that first year. But time has a way of numbing you more than healing you. In the years after, I slowly learned how to exist, not to live, but not to disappear. My son, Lucas, is all I have left. I used to think if he was happy, I was happy. But as time went on, the distance between us grew. He has a wife, Harper, pretty and ambitious, who works in real estate. I tried to fit in sending baked goods, birthday gifts, Christmas cards, but I mostly got short thank you texts back, cold as an auto reply. So when the phone rang and the lawyer's voice came on, "Mrs. Whitmore, I represent the estate office of Mr. Douglas Bennett. He left his entire estate to you, valued at $5 million. I thought I'd misheard. I asked him to read every number and clause again. Then I quietly sat down, my hands still shaking. I, who used to count every pension dollar, who used grocery coupons, suddenly had more money than in my entire life combined. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept looking around my old apartment, every photo on the wall, every one of my husband's things, then thinking about Lucas. I wondered, if I called to share this news, how would he react? Would he come hug me and say congratulations? Or ask, what do you plan to do with the money? That thought tightened my chest. Part of me didn't want to doubt my own son, but another part, the part that had been ignored too long, wanted to know the truth. So instead of telling the truth, I chose to lie. I would test my son, not with money, but with love itself. The next morning, I sat in the living room, the landline in my hand. I'd practiced the sentence all night. I've lost everything, Lucas. The bank took the place. I don't know where to go. When I spoke, my voice shook like it was real, and my heart hurt like it was real. On the other end, my son exhaled softly, then answered fast, "Oh my God, Mom, don't worry. Come here. I'll get the room ready. Everything will be fine." I started to cry as I listened. Part relief, part a vague gut feeling. The answer came too quickly, too perfectly, like it wasn't real. "Are you sure?" I asked quietly. "I'm sure. Come tomorrow. Don't bring much, just the essentials. Our place isn't big." "I understand," I said. Then I hung up, feeling half lighter, half heavier. All night I folded clothes and packed presses, upped them into an old suitcase. Every shirt, every picture frame, every childhood birthday card of Lucas made me cry. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing. I only knew I needed an answer, even if that answer meant losing my son forever. At sunrise the next morning, I called a cab. During the 40-minute ride to Oakfield, where Lucas and Harper live, I stared out the window, bare trees, restaurant signs, people hurrying to work, everything familiar yet distant. I used to come here every Christmas, always with gifts and hope. The cab stopped in front of the 2-story cream-colored house on the corner, but before I could pay, one detail froze me. On the front lawn stood a big white sign with red letters, "For sale open house this weekend." I thought I was seeing it wrong. I stepped out, pulled my suitcase along, heart racing. The door was locked, curtains drawn, no sound inside. I rang the bell, no answer. I knocked and called out, "Lucas, it's Mom, open the door." Only the wind through the trees and the mail carrier's cart squeaking at the corner. I walked to the side window and pressed my face to the gap in the curtain. Inside was empty. No furniture, no wedding photos. The house had been cleared. I sank onto the steps. It took a few minutes to notice my hands were shaking. Lucas had lied. Right after my call, he and his wife had left in the night. "Ma'am, are you looking for someone?" A woman's voice came from behind me. I turned and saw an older neighbor with silver hair, a blue sweater, and a grocery bag. "I'm looking for my son, Lucas Whitmore. He lives here." She tilted her head. "Oh, Lucas? I'm Nora next door. I saw them busy last night, moving things all evening." I asked, and Harper said there was something urgent and they had to go, probably moving somewhere else. I gripped the railing, steadying my voice. "Do you know where they went?" Nora shook her head, then remembered. "I only heard Harper asking. Someone about the South River area, near Central Market. She said they were looking for a temporary rental. That's all." I thanked her and stood. My legs felt weak, but something rose in my mind, not despair, but resolve. If Lucas wanted to disappear, I would find out why. I pulled the suitcase back to the curb, the for sale sign casting a long shadow on the grass. The morning sun was bright and cold. People passing by looked at me, an old woman with white hair standing in a quiet neighborhood, suitcase in hand, blank stare. They probably thought I was lost. They didn't know I'd just been abandoned on my own son's doorstep. I took out my phone and called Lucas again. 1 ring, 2, then voicemail. "Hey, this is Lucas. Leave a message." I hung up, heart tight. I tried a text. "Son, I'm at your house. Please call me." It showed sent, but never turned to read. I got back in the cab. The driver asked, "Where to, ma'am?" "Back to my place," I answered, softly. On the way home, I watched the city slide past the glass. The streets looked the same, but inside me something had completely collapsed. My test was over, and the result was harsher than my worst fear. Back at the apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the sofa and stared at the empty space in the mirror. My husband's voice echoed in my memory. "Sandy, people only show their character when they lose their advantage." Yes, and now I knew my son's character. I looked out the window. The afternoon light fell across the buildings, washing everything in dull bronze. In that moment, I realized I was no longer the mother who forgives everything, no longer the woman who waits silently for leftover love. I'm the woman who will find answers. Tomorrow, I would go to South River. And if Lucas thought he could run from the very person who brought him into this world, he forgot that his mother is the one who taught him how to survive it. The next morning, the sky was gray, mist hanging along the river like a thin curtain. I sat on an old bus headed to South River, both hands gripping my purse on my lap. The city was waking up, young people rushing, horns, the smell of coffee drifting from corner shops, and me, a woman nearing 70, was going to trace the steps of a son who ran from his own mother. The bus stopped at the last station near Central Market, where the vendors' shouts and the smell of frying oil filled the air. I took a breath and pulled a small note from my purse, scribbled with South River Harper Rental. Those words were my compass that morning. I turned into a small corner bodega with a faded sign and ripe bananas hanging inside. The owner, a Puerto Rican woman with silver hair and a bun and kind eyes, rang up my water. I asked quietly, "Do you know any buildings around here with cheap rentals?" "I'm looking for my son," he said. "He just moved to this area, but I don't remember the street." She thought for a moment, then said, "Oh, around here there are 3 places that rent a lot. The Santander building 2 blocks over, Los Cedros behind the market, and Greenview Apartments on the main thoroughfare. Old places, but the price is low." I thanked her and wrote the names down. When I stepped outside, the wind made the paper tremble in my hand like my heart. 3 names, 3 doors that might lead to the truth. I started with the Santander building. It was a 4-story red brick building, worn but tidy. At the front desk, a middle-aged man was reading a paper. I asked, "Excuse me, I'm looking for my son. He and his wife just moved in, Lucas and Harper Whitmore." He looked up, raised an eyebrow. "Whitmore? No, this week we only had an older couple move into 3A and a student on the first floor. Nobody by that name." I forced a smile, thanked him, and left. Lucas echoed in my mind how strange it sounded now. The second building, Los Cedros, sat behind Central Market. It was pale gray, with blotched walls and a rusty, half-broken buzzer panel. I had to shove the door to get it open. The hallway was dark, damp, and echoing with drips from a pipe. My heels clicked as I walked. On the third floor, arguing voices spilled from the last apartment, an angry man, a woman sobbing. I froze, heart pounding, but when I listened closer, it wasn't Lucas. I exhaled and left, my spirits sagging like a snapped string. The last building was Greenview Apartments. I arrived near noon. Compared to the other two, Greenview looked brighter, beige walls, clean glass doors. I climbed the steps to the intercom. Names were etched on a metal panel by unit. I scanned line by line, stopping at the fifth. L. Whitmore, 2. B. I held my breath. My eyes blurred for a second. Whitmore, the name of my son, my husband, my family. I inhaled and pressed the buzzer. Once, twice. Then, a woman's voice came through the clipped, cool voice of Harper. No one by that. Our name here. You've got the wrong place. Before I could answer, a click ended the line. I stood there with my hand still on the intercom. The chill of the metal brought me back. Harper had lied. I stepped back and waited by the planter, watching the main door. If I was patient, someone would go in or out and I could slip inside. Around lunchtime, foot traffic picked up. About 10 minutes later, a young man carrying a pizza box walked up. As he opened the door, I gave a small smile. Thank you, honey. I'm visiting someone on the second floor and forgot the code. He didn't ask anything, holding the door for me. I went in, my heart pounding hard enough to hurt. The second floor hall stretched long with moss-green carpet under dim yellow lights. I walked slowly, reading the numbers. At the end, 2B, a brand new doormat and a little bell hanging by the frame, the kind Harper likes. I remembered. I stood there a long moment and listened, whispering from inside a low male voice, a higher female voice, arguing under their breath. I pressed my ear to the door and recognized Lucas. I took a deep breath and knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. I knocked harder and called out, "Lucas, it's Mom! Open the door, son!" The voices went silent. Then nothing. The silence was so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. I didn't know how they were looking at each other behind the door, but I knew they were listening. I knocked again, louder. "Son, I just want to talk. I need to know what's going on." Soft footsteps approached. The lock turned. The door opened a few inches. Lucas appeared. He stood in the doorway, pale, dark circles under his eyes, hair a mess. His gaze slid away, guilty like a child caught in a lie. Behind him, Harper stood with arms crossed, lips tight, eyes cold. What are you doing here, Mom?" Lucas asked hoarsely. I swallowed, keeping steady. "I went where you told me to. Your house had a for sale sign. And you vanished. Now I'm hunting all over like a beggar for love. Why, Lucas?" He looked down, saying nothing. Harper cut in, voice flat as steel. "You can't just show up here, Mrs. Whitmore. We're busy, and I already told you have the wrong place." I looked at her, swallowing the hurt. "Wrong place? The name Whitmore is on this door. I'm not mistaken, Harper. But it seems my son is mistaken between the mother who gave him life and a stranger." The air thickened. Lucas glanced at his wife, then back to the floor. I saw his hand tremble, like he was fighting panic. I needed the truth from him. "Say it, Lucas," I asked softly, voice tight. "Why did you do this? You told me to come. Then you left in the night. Are you running from your mother?" He opened his mouth, but Harper jumped in. Icy. "You don't understand. We're going through a rough patch. Lucas didn't want you to worry. As for selling the house, that was my decision. And honestly, I can't take on another person. You're retired. You can take care of yourself." I stared at her. "So you lied? Disappeared in the night and left me on the doorstep, thinking my son had vanished?" Harper shrugged. Lucas finally spoke. "Harper, let me talk." He turned to me, eyes tired. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do. Harper's right. We're tight on money and space. I thought you'd understand." I laughed once, bitter. "Understand? That my son lied to his mother and snuck off in the night like a criminal?" Harper exhaled sharply. "You're making this a big deal. We're not obligated to," I cut in, calm enough to chill the room. "You're right. You're not obligated. But my son has one responsibility, not about money, about basic human decency." Lucas bit his lip, eyes going blank. Harper looked like she wanted to retort, then didn't. The apartment fell silent except for the slow ceiling fan. Standing in that doorway, I realized everything I'd feared had come true. Even cracked open a few inches, this door was a wall between me and my family. I inhaled and stepped back half a pace. "All right," I said quietly. I understand. No one needs to tell me to leave. I'll go. Lucas looked up, about to speak, but Harper slammed the door. The deadbolt clicked dry, final. I turned and walked down the hall, each step crushing an old memory. In every glass panel I passed, I saw the blurred reflection of a mother small, alone, but standing straight. Outside, the wind kicked up and leaves whirled around my feet. I glanced once at the Greenview Apartments sign. How ironic the name promised a pleasant view, but inside were gray walls and closed hearts. I kept walking, carrying a hollow ache lit by a slow, stubborn resolve. The answer I got today wasn't an ending, it was the start of waking up. If Lucas chose to close his door to me, I would open another one for myself. I stood there in the narrow doorway, looking at the face of the son I once thought I knew better than anyone. Light spilled from the room, cool over his tired, hesitant features. I asked, calm but tight, "Why did you run after telling me to come stay?" Lucas lowered his head, silent. The pause stretched so long I could hear the wall clock ticking inside like dripping water. Before he could answer, Harper stepped forward, arms crossed, voice even and hard. "We can't take on another person, Mrs. Sandra. This place has only 2 bedrooms, and we both work from morning till night. You need care we can't provide." I kept my voice steady. "Care? I don't need anyone to care for me, Harper. I need a roof, a few square feet, and basic kindness." Harper gave a thin smile, eyes sharp. "You always make yourself sound pitiful, but everyone knows you play the martyr very well. Lucas grew up in the shadow of all that sacrifice you made him feel guilty every time he lived for himself." I froze. Her matter. Words were cruel, but they landed. "I never tried to make my son feel guilty. I did what a mother does, love and provide." "No, you manipulated his feelings with old stories," Harper said, voice rising. "Every time Lucas wanted something different, you retold the widowhood, the hardship, making it sound like he owes you for life." I turned to Lucas. "Is that what you think too?" He stayed quiet, avoiding my eyes like a child hiding from a truth. I stepped closer, softer. "I'm only asking one thing. Do you want me to stay with you?" Harper started to cut in, but I raised a hand, eyes on Lucas. "No one answers for you. I want to hear it from your mouth." He took a breath and lifted his head. His voice shook, barely above a whisper. "I can't, Mom. It's just, for now, this is better for everyone. I don't want my wife to be uncomfortable. You understand, right?" I pressed my lips together. "So, to keep your wife from being uncomfortable, you're fine with your mother standing outside the door." He said nothing. Harper chuckled under her breath, then placed a hand on his shoulder like a claim. "See, Lucas? She always knows how to make everything about herself." That was the last straw. Blood rushed to my face, but I didn't shout or cry. I just looked at her so calmly she actually drew back half a step. "You can say whatever you want about me, Harper, but don't forget the person who gave Lucas his name, his family, and his life is me. If I truly made everything about myself the way you say, you wouldn't be standing in this apartment saying these things today." Harper arched a brow, then suddenly slammed the door. The echo boomed down the hall. The deadbolt turned dry, final like a blade into my chest. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the painted wood as if it were a cold headstone. 40 years of motherhood, from sleepless nights with a feverish child to extra shifts to pay, tuition, to birthdays, where I still brought gifts, even when the door didn't open, felt erased with a single shut door. I gripped the rail and took the stairs one at a time. Outside, I didn't cry. I felt empty, no sound, no tears, just a silence that cut. The road ahead stretched long. I walked with no destination. When I reached Marble Square Park, I sat on a wooden bench. The sun was sinking, light spilling across the lake like melted gold. My hands rested on my knees, trembling. I didn't know if it was the cold or the hurt. People walked past without noticing the white-haired woman sitting alone. I watched young couples holding their kids' hands and saw myself decades ago, the woman who believed a mother's bond could never break. But that bond, it turns out, can dissolve with a single turn of the back. The phone buzzed softly in my pocket. I looked down. A text from Mason Price, the attorney who'd called about the inheritance. "Hello, Miss Sandra. A reminder about YM. In your appointment to sign the asset documents on Friday. Please confirm the time." I stared at the screen, and a strange feeling rose up. On one side was a reality that had just collapsed, my son turning his back. On the other was the figure of $5 million waiting for my signature. If Lucas and Harper knew that, I thought, they'd come back immediately. They'd say sweet things, hug me, apologize, but they wouldn't do it out of love, they'd do it for the money. I knew that for sure, and that certainty chilled me. I turned off the screen, slipped the phone into my pocket, and looked out at the lake. The water rippled, reflecting streetlights that had just switched on. Each lamp was a trembling streak of yellow, like my faith inside me, fragile and about to go out. I remembered what my husband Richard said the night before he died. Don't give everything away, Sandra. Sometimes people only value you when they know you can still keep something for yourself. I didn't understand it then. Now I felt it in my bones. I sat a long while, listening to the wind hiss through the trees. Then I stood, pulled my scarf tight, and walked slowly toward the bus stop. The city was lit up. Lights glittered on the sidewalk, but none of them felt warm enough to shine into a person's heart. On the bus, I took a window seat and watched buildings streak by. Bright windows, families gathered at dinner tables. It all looked like a movie I no longer belonged to. I wondered how many mothers in this world were sitting in the dark, telling themselves their children were just busy, just tired, when really, those children just wanted to forget. When I got back to my apartment building, I opened the door and switched on the light. The small room filled with warm yellow, but it was still empty. I hung my coat, set down my bag, and stood before my husband's memorial shelf. "Do you see this, Richard?" I said softly. "The child we raised has learned how to turn away." I sat down and opened my old notebook where I write weekly entries. A fresh page stared back at me. I wrote one line. Today, the door didn't just close. It buried a mother's trust. I set the pen down and closed my eyes. In my head, the image of Harper slamming the door replayed like a broken reel. The cold eyes, the turning lock, and Lucas's bowed face. I knew that if I didn't find a way to stand up, bitterness would swallow me whole. But I also knew that after today, I couldn't see the world with my old eyes anymore. The night breeze slipped through the window and fluttered the curtain. I stood and drew it shut, then looked outside the sky, black and glittering with stars. I whispered to myself, fine, if my son chooses his own road, I'll take mine. And this time, I won't turn back. I turned off the lights and left a small candle burning on the memorial shelf. Its flicker brushed across Richard's photo. He smiled in that picture, peaceful, as if he'd known all along. I sighed and said quietly, maybe you were right. It's time I learned to keep apart from myself, not money, but self-respect. The next morning I woke with swollen eyes but a strangely clear head. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtain, sketching a trembling band of light across the wall. Last night I didn't dream. I didn't see the slamming door, didn't hear Harper's cold voice or picture Lucas's lowered gaze. Only a deep silence, enough for me to hear my own breathing. I made coffee, sat at the table, and pulled a blank sheet toward me. Every morning before, I made lists of things to do for other people, buy Lucas's birthday gift, book flights for Harper, send cards to relatives. But this morning I wrote a different header, things to do just for me. First line, therapy. Second line, find a small house with a garden. Third line, learn to paint. Fourth line, travel at least once, not for anyone else. I sat, looking at those 4 lines for a long time, like I was studying a map back to myself. I knew that if I kept waiting for a call or a text from Lucas, I'd trap myself in a cage I built. So I decided to cut contact for now. I wouldn't delete his number or block him, I just wouldn't reach out. I would let silence answer all the excuses. I opened the window, and early summer air drifted in with the scent of jasmine from the neighbor's balcony. The sky was a painfully bright blue, as if to remind me the world doesn't stop for my pain. In the afternoon, I called Mason Price, the gentle attorney whose voice is steady like an old radio. "Hello, Miss Sandra," he said. "Everything is ready. You just need to come sign and choose an investment plan," I answered quietly. "I want to keep this private, Mason. No one knows, not even my family." "Of course. Discretion is sometimes the best shield," he said. I scheduled a meeting for the next day at his downtown office. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 10 years. I ate dinner alone at a restaurant. I picked a small spot by the Mississippi where the lights were warm and the jazz was soft. When the server set down a glass of red wine, I looked around. No one was smirking. No one looked pitying. Just an older woman enjoying her meal. I ordered grilled salmon and a chocolate dessert. With the first bite, I realized I didn't feel guilty. I used to count every dollar because I had to save for my son, used to skip small joys because Lucas needed money to fix the house. Tonight, for the first time in years, I ate for my own taste, not out of guilt. Back home, I slipped off my shoes, lay down, and slept deeply. No sleeping pills, no nightmares. Relief spread through my body like an invisible cord had finally been cut. The next morning, I made coffee and checked my phone. No calls from Lucas. I typed one short line, "Are you doing okay?" 2 minutes later, it showed seen. No reply. I looked at the screen for a few seconds, then set the phone down, neither disappointed nor angry, just quiet acceptance. I knew that if they knew I had $5 million, everything would change. They'd come back with honeyed words, but I don't need that kind of love anymore. Instead of waiting, I started planning the rest of my life. I wanted to do something meaningful. I thought about trips to the grocery store, where I'd see silver-haired women count coins at the register, and the stories of widows abandoned in nursing homes. Those faces stayed with me. I opened my laptop and typed a new heading, Harbor Fund for Women Over 60 Who've Been Abandoned. I chose that name because I know what it feels like to drift. Women are the home for others when they're young, but few are a home for themselves when they're old. I wanted to create a harbor, a place to be heard, helped, and most of all respected. I called Mason and outlined the idea. He was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "You know, Sandra, not everyone with money thinks this way. I can introduce you to some financial advisors to structure the fund transparently and safely." "Thank you, Mason. I don't want the fund to carry my name. I just want anyone who receives a meal or a roof from it to feel they still have worth." In the afternoon, I went to his office. The conference room was small, white walls, glass door looking out on a rush of people. I signed a thick stack of documents, each page like a new chapter in my life. When Mason handed me the pen, he said, "I think you're not just signing for the money, you're signing for the right to live for yourself." I smiled. Maybe so. Leaving the office, I walked around Como Lake. A light breeze, trembling new leaves. Cyclists passed, couples sat on the grass. I realized life was still beautiful, even without someone walking beside me. Back home, I opened my journal and wrote a short note to myself. From now on, don't demand love. Don't beg for attention. Keep your dignity. That's the one part no one can take. I closed the notebook and felt like a stone had dropped from my chest. Near dusk, I brewed tea and took it to the balcony. Sunset laid a copper wash over distant rooftops. Sparrows perched on the wires, chirped a few times, and flew off. Watching them, I understood. Some things leave not out of hate, but because they need a wider sky. Maybe I need a sky like that too. That night, I opened my contacts and scrolled to Lucas's number. It sat there among old entries. My son, family. I didn't delete it. I just renamed it Enough. A note to myself. Enough hurt, enough hope, enough waiting. Before bed, I stood in front of the mirror. The woman there wasn't trembling like a few days ago. The silver hair was still messy, but the eyes were different, clear, calm, with the depth of someone who's come through a storm. I looked for a long time and said softly, "Welcome back, Sandra. You finally have your own backbone again." I smiled and turned off the light. In the dark, I heard my heartbeat slow, steady like a quiet promise. I'm still alive, and this time, I'm living for me. I can still see that autumn morning 10 years ago when Daniel, my husband, took his last breath at Mercy Hospital. Sunlight slipped through the window and fell across his face, pale gold and strangely peaceful. I sat there holding his hand until it cooled. After that, every sound blurred: the heart monitor, the doctor calling his name, the wind down the hallway. Only one thing kept echoing in my head: "You'll be okay, Sandra." Daniel said that to me before he left, but I wasn't okay. Over 40 years of marriage, I worked at a garment factory on the outskirts of Street Paul. 35 years of metal presses, shift whistles, and the sharp smell of dye. Daniel was a truck driver, often on the road, so I was mostly home with our son Lucas. We weren't rich, but we got by. Every dollar I earned was split in two, one part for bills, the rest for Lucas. I remember heavy snow days when I walked more than 2 miles to the plant because the bus was delayed, just to get home in time to cook for him. I skipped breakfast for a month to buy him his first first pair of Nike basketball shoes. When he smiled, I forgot the tiredness. Lucas was a good kid, kind, affectionate, thoughtful. But when Daniel died, everything changed. Lucas was 28, married just over a year. I tried not to show him my weakness, but he wasn't the boy who ran to hug his mom anymore. He was busy, closed off, and Harper, my new daughter-in-law, didn't seem to want me in their life. At first, I told myself, young people are busy, don't overthink it. But the distance kept growing. Calls got shorter. I'm in a meeting, Mom. Don't worry, we're fine. Visits grew fewer, from weekly to monthly to only on holidays. Harper always smiled politely, but her eyes drew a boundary. This is our territory. I understood and slowly stepped back. I still sent birthday gifts, Christmas cakes, and cards, but many gifts never got opened. I know because I saw them sitting in the garage on one visit, dust thick on packages I'd wrapped carefully. I stood still in the smell of gas and paint, looking at my gifts like forgotten memories. That feeling of being invisible followed me for years. First it was sadness, then emptiness, and finally a nagging doubt. If I had nothing left, would my son still see me as his mother? I remember the night Mason, the attorney, called. He told me about a distant cousin's estate, $5 million. I sat frozen in my chair, receiver in hand, mind spinning. That sum was far beyond anything I'd imagined. But what kept me awake wasn't the money. It was a question, sharp and clear. If I were wealthy, would my son love me more? And then another, deeper, harsher. If I were poor, would he still love me? That's when the idea to test him took root. I'm not a schemer. I just wanted the truth. People say, when you're old, keep the peace and don't stir things up. But after a lifetime of living for others, at the end, I wanted to live once for the truth. I knew the test could break us forever. I knew that if Lucas turned away, I might have no one left. But at my age, I'd rather face real pain than live with sweet lies. That night, I wrote a plan in a small notebook, the kind I used for household budgets when I was working. On the first page, I wrote, "If love needs money to survive, it isn't love." When I called Lucas and lied that I'd lost everything, my heart pounded like I'd committed a crime. I could hear my voice tremble. But behind the fear was a thin line of hope that my son would prove me wrong, that my doubts were just a lonely, oversensitive mind. When Lucas said, "Come over, I've got the room ready," I almost burst into tears. I wanted to believe. I did believe. I even pictured us having dinner together, me cooking his favorite roast, Harper slowly seeing I wasn't a burden. I even thought about telling them about the money so they'd know I didn't need anyone to support me. I just wanted to be loved. But the next morning, standing in front of an empty house and the for sale sign flashing in the sun, every hope in me turned to dust. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence. Anyone who's been turned away by family knows how much that silence hurts. What about you? In this story, what hurt you the most? Write and tell me in the comments, not to judge who's right or wrong, but so we know we're not alone walking through wounds like these. I sat on the steps for hours, trying to justify what they did. Maybe something happened, maybe Harper misunderstood. But the more I thought, the less I could find a decent reason for leaving your mother on the doorstep. It felt like standing in a room that used to be warm, and suddenly someone kills the lights, pulls away the blanket, and throws open the window to the cold. I knew I couldn't go back to how it was. Some wounds don't bleed, but they wake you up. And from that day, I understood the relationship between my son and me was just a single thread, and I wasn't the one holding the scissors. Many nights after, I sat by the window and watched the lights in the homes across the street. Over there, families gathered, laughter carrying through thin walls. I had only the ticking clock and my thoughts drifting on and on. Had I loved him so much I smothered him, or had my love never been the right kind? No answer came, only silence. And in that silence, one thing became clear. I won't buy back family with envelopes of cash, won't keep my son nearby with meals or promises of help. If love has to be paid for, I'd rather lose it. My test really had only one question. If Mom is empty-handed, will you open the door? I got my answer. That door didn't open. It didn't just close in my face, it closed inside me quietly, decisively, not with anger, but with clarity. When you've been hurt enough, you start seeing things in a different light. I began to understand that family isn't only shared names or blood. Family is where someone truly opens the door when you knock. I used to think happiness meant having my son nearby, hearing mom every weekend, but now I rewrote that definition in my old notebook, my shaky letters still clear. Family is where you are seen, respected, and loved without conditions. I folded the notebook and set it on the table, then looked around my small room. Afternoon light spilled through the window, bathing everything in warm gold. I was still alone, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel empty. I no longer needed anyone to confirm my worth. I only needed to live by what I believe, that even when family turns away, self-respect is the strongest roof you can have. 2 weeks later, Mason called to confirm the full amount had been transferred. His voice was steady and a bit warmer than before. "Congratulations, Sandra. Life rarely gives us a chance to start over at this age. It seems you've figured out how." I smiled into the phone. "Not starting over, Mason, just continuing differently." That afternoon, I walked into a small 2-bedroom house in Maple Grove with keys in hand. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough cream walls, a big east-facing window, and an old apple tree standing quietly in the backyard. Its leaves were turning yellow, with a few fruit left from last season. I touched the bark, rough and familiar, like holding an old friend's hand. Sun poured through the window onto the light wood floor. I set my small suitcase down and stood in the middle of the empty living room, hearing my heart beat clearly. After years squeezed into the old apartment, it felt like the space itself could breathe. That evening, I cooked a simple meal: chicken soup, bread, a glass of red wine. I dimmed the lights and played the old piano track Daniel loved. The notes moved slowly, as if time had finally softened its grip on me. I raised my glass and said quietly, "Welcome home, Sandra." In the days that followed, I built new habits. Every morning, I opened the window to the first light, made coffee, and walked the neighborhood. Maple Grove was quiet, small houses tucked behind rows of maples, people greeting each other with a smile and a nod. I felt myself blending into that simple rhythm: no noise, no demands, full of life. One morning, I stopped by the community center to sign up for a watercolor class. The teacher, Maribel, about 40, hair in a bun and a voice light as a breeze, greeted me with a smile. "It's never too late to learn something new, you know?" I half joked, half meant it. "I'm just worried my hands will shake too much to draw a straight line." "That's okay," she smiled. "Nothing in this life is perfectly straight anyway." In the first class, I sat among people 20 or 30 years younger. The brush trembled. The water bled outside the line, leaving strange streaks. I almost crumpled the paper, but Maribel stepped over, studied it, and said softly, "Don't fix it. Let it dry." Sometimes the mistakes make the painting real. I looked at the blue seeping into yellow, turning a light teal, and suddenly I felt hope could sprout from mistakes too. That weekend, I went back to Mason's office to sign the paperwork establishing the Harbor Fund. $1 million was set aside, invested safely, with the earnings used for rent assistance, food, and legal counseling for women over 60 who'd been abandoned or had nowhere to go. Mason set the file in front of me and asked, "Will the fund carry your name?" I shook my head. "No, I don't want my name tied to pity. I just want anyone who gets a meal or a roof from this fund to feel they still matter." In the afternoon, I went to the Women's Center to meet the first recipients. A small room, round table, a teapot in the middle. One white-haired lady said her son had placed her in a nursing home and never came back. Another had been widowed at 40 and lived on meager benefits. They talked. I listened. Each story was a slice of the pain I'd tasted. When a woman named Ruth said she hadn't been called Mom in 3 years, I turned my face aside and pretended to sip tea so I could wipe my eyes. I realized these women didn't need rescuing. They needed to be seen, respected, and reminded they aren't invisible. After the meeting, I walked to the parking lot as a light rain began. The wind brought up the smell of wet earth, and I thought of my backyard, where the old apple tree was waiting. I looked up at the gray sky and thought, rain doesn't just wet the ground, it rinses away what's old. In the weeks that followed my browned, life settled into a new rhythm. Mornings I painted, afternoons I worked with the fund's volunteers. They called me Miss Sandra and checked in like friends. On weekends, we brought food to the community market: produce, milk, and bread for older women living alone. Once, a lady held my hand hand and, trembling, said, "I thought I was just living to get through the month, but today, I feel like I'm still in this life." Her words stilled me. I understood that a roof and a meal can heal more than any comforting speech. That night I went home, took a hot shower, and sat at my desk to write my journal. I wrote, "A home can heal, but first, you have to dare to step out of the old house of your memories." I closed the notebook and looked around my new kitchen. On the table was the first watercolor I'd painted, a sunlit apple tree, uneven leaves, clumsy strokes of color. But I liked it. It proved I dared to try, dared to be wrong, and dared to live. I poured a cup of tea and opened my phone to check the news. Among a flood of alerts was a new message from a familiar number. Lucas. A short line, just 6 words. "Mom, I want to meet." I sat still, my fingertip resting lightly on the screen. My heart tightened, not from happiness, but from a very familiar fear. If I answer, will everything repeat itself? I set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. Moonlight sifted through the apple tree, scattering flickers across the floor. I took a deep breath and practiced the breathing Maribel taught in painting class. Breathe in, receive the present. Breathe out, release the past. I closed my eyes and felt the cool air fill my lungs. I didn't reply to Lucas's message. I just wrote a single line in my journal before bed. Learn to delay your response. Not out of coldness, but because I no longer want to rush in and rescue anyone out of old habit. I closed the notebook and blew out the candle on the table. In the wad, dark, I heard the garden leaves rustle and the faint scent of ripe apples drift into the room. A new chapter of my life had truly opened, not with display, but with peace of mind. I knew that whether Lucas came back or not, I would stand firm. Because for the first time in years, I didn't just have a home, I had myself. It took me 3 days to think about that message. 3 days between sleepless nights and mornings waking to a tangled heart. I didn't want to meet Lucas while I was emotional, and I didn't want to meet him with a heart full of anger. I needed clarity for myself and for him. On Saturday morning, I took my notebook and wrote a short line. Sunday, 3 p.m., Liberty Square Central Fountain. I sent Lucas a message with only the location and time, nothing more. He replied 10 minutes later, "I'll be there." That Sunday, the sky was clear, the breeze light sunlight pouring across the red brick of the square. I arrived 15 minutes early, and I chose a stone bench by the maples. Water shot up from the central fountain and fell back down, leaving a thin mist that hovered like autumn breath. I sat with my hands clasped, trying to stay calm. Part of me wanted to turn away and dodge the conversation ahead, but the other part, the part that had endured, lost, and learned to stand, wanted to face it. Right at 3, Lucas appeared. I almost didn't recognize him. The tidy hair was now a mess. His face was gaunt, stubble, patchy, a wrinkled shirt, dark circles, and a careful gait like he feared his own shadow. "Mom," he said, voice low and tired. I nodded and gestured to the bench across from me. "Sit down, Lucas." He sat, rubbing his hands together, eyes avoiding mine. For a few seconds, only the sound of the fountain fell between us. Then he spoke. "Harper's gone, Mom. She left me, took everything. The credit cards, the lease. She left a pile of debt and an apartment about to be seized." I stayed quiet. I didn't feel triumph, and I didn't feel pity, just a hollow chill spreading like a cold wind. "I need you," he continued, voice catching. "I know I was wrong. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have treated you like that, but I'm really stuck. I'm only asking you to help me this one time so I can pay the rent and start over." I looked at him for a long while. In that moment, I didn't see the little boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder. I saw a weary man crushed by the very life he'd built. I asked softly, "Lucas, do you remember the last place I saw you?" He frowned and nodded slightly. "The apartment at Greenview." I nodded, my voice even and calm. "That day, I stood at your door. You knew I was coming because you'd said, 'Come over, I've got the room ready.' But when I knocked, Harper told me I had the wrong place, and you stood behind her without a word. When I finally asked, you said, 'For now, this will be better for everyone.'" Lucas lowered his head. I went on, not raising my voice, each word cutting the air clean and sharp. "You didn't fail because you're broke, Lucas. I've been poorer than you are now, many times. You failed because you lacked humanity." I saw his shoulders shake, his hand clench. "I know, you're right. But Harper, she poisoned me, Mom. She made me believe you just wanted control. That you didn't want me to be independent. I was stupid. I let her lead me." I looked at him, my heart dipping once. Harper could say things, manipulate, but you chose to believe. You chose to turn your back on me. No one forced you. He lifted his head, eyes red. I'm sorry. I just want a chance to fix it. I don't want to lose you. I promise I'll be different this time. I was silent. A breeze stirred. Maple leaves spiraled around us. I spoke slowly, light but firm. Chances, Lucas. Don't come with cash. He blinked, confused. Mom, what do you mean? I mean, if you truly want to heal this, you have to stand up first. I can't keep rescuing someone who won't rescue himself. I have money, but I won't use it to buy back filial piety. He dropped his gaze, fist tightening. I knew my words hurt him, but I also knew they were bitter medicine he needed. He murmured, I'll try, but Mom, I'm in real trouble. If you could lend me a little just to keep the apartment. I sighed and met his eyes. Lucas, don't you see? Every time you say I need you, it comes with an invoice. You don't need me, you need my money. And I'm tired of playing that role. He fell silent. The look in his eyes shifted from pleading to confusion, then settled into shame. You think I came just for money? I didn't answer right away. I asked, if I came here today empty-handed, would you sit and talk this long? Silence. The question dropped like a stone into the fountain, sending ripples through everything. I stood, pulled my cardigan close, and said quietly, Lucas, I don't want you to suffer, and I don't want you to be poor, but I can't let you use family like a loan agreement. When you learn to respect people even when they give you nothing, then come find me. I walked away, hearing the bench creak behind me. Lucas called, Mom, but I didn't turn back. I walked slowly, each step heavy as lead, but my head held high. Overhead, the clouds thinned, and the late sun lit my hair, catching the silver strands. I felt my heart pounding, not from pain, but from release. I knew today wasn't the end. The ties between me and Lucas weren't completely severed, but they had changed, shifting from dependence to boundaries. A mother can still love, but love with wisdom and self-respect. Leaving the square, I stopped at a small cafe on the corner. The young server asked what I'd like. I said, a cappuccino light on sugar. When she brought it, I looked at the white foam and saw my reflection. I told myself I didn't win this conversation, but I didn't lose myself. I texted Lucas short without blame or anger. I hope you're okay. When you're truly ready, I'll listen. I hit send, turned off my phone, and set it face down on the table. Outside the window, the fountain still leaped high, sunlight catching a faint rainbow. I smiled. Maybe everyone has to walk through their own sun and rain to see a rainbow. And I, a mother who once thought losing her son meant losing everything, suddenly realized I haven't lost anything. I finally learned to stand without anyone holding my hand. 3 days after the meeting at the square, I got a message from Lucas. Mom, I want to hear the truth. Just tell me the truth. Even if it hurts, I want to know. I read it over and over. For the first time in a long while, my son wasn't asking for money or making excuses. He just wanted to hear the truth. I wasn't sure if it was real remorse or just another stepping stone in our bargaining, but I'd come far enough to know if I kept quiet, the unsaid would harden into a wall. I texted back, okay, tomorrow at 4 p.m., the Harbor Cafe by the river. Be on time. The next day was overcast. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table by the window. The Mississippi shimmered like silver. Gulls skimmed the water. I ordered chamomile tea, the only thing that steadies my heart. At exactly 4, Lucas walked in. He was thinner and worn, but his eyes held something different, not tense, not evasive. Thank you for coming, he said softly. I nodded. You said you wanted the truth. I'll tell you everything today. No hiding, no circling. But before I speak, promise me one thing. Don't interrupt. Listen to the end. Lucas nodded, his hand on the table trembling slightly. I drew a breath and began. Lucas, a few months ago I got a call from attorney Mason Price. He told me I was inheriting $5 million from a distant uncle in California. That money is fully legal, with no conditions attached. Lucas's eyes widened. He leaned forward. $5 million? I nodded slightly. Yes, but the first thing I thought of wasn't money. It was you. For years I've made excuses for your coldness, busy, your own family, pressure. But deep down I carried a fear. If I had nothing, would you still open your door for me? He looked down at the steaming cup. So, I went on. I did something you may hate. I pretended to be broke. I called and said I'd lost everything and was about to be evicted. I just wanted to see when I was empty-handed. What would you do? The air between us thickened. Lucas looked up, shock and disbelief crossing his face. Mom, you tested me? I nodded. I did. Not to shame you or trap you. I just wanted to know how much truth was left in our love. He went quiet for a few seconds, then let out a twisted half smile. So, all of it was staged? You manipulated me. His voice rose. A few people glanced over. I laid my hand lightly on the table, steady. No, Lucas, I didn't manipulate you. I shined a light on your choice. Everyone has a chance to act by their conscience. I didn't make you run. The door at Greenview didn't close because of me. It closed because of you. He bit his lip, silent, eyes flickering like they were searching for an exit. I know, I said more gently, that if you'd opened the door that day, everything might have been different. I would have hugged you, we would have talked, and then I would have told you about the money. You wouldn't have had to ask for anything, because I had planned to share a part with you, but you didn't open it, and in that moment, I understood I couldn't buy back family with money. Lucas exhaled. Easy for you to say. Do you know what I went through? Harper left me. Debts piled up. I was a mess. I was scared. If you really wanted to, I help. Why put me through a test like that? I met his eyes. Because if I helped without knowing who you were, I'd only be feeding dependence, not saving my son. You needed saving from yourself, Lucas. He shook his head, voice cracking. You don't get it. Harper made me believe you wanted control. She said, if you moved in, you'd control my marriage. I gave a sad smile. And you chose to believe her over the person who raised you for 30 years. That's okay. I'm not angry. But I won't live as the mother who can be used anymore. I have a clear principle now. I won't give financial relief. If you truly want to start over, I can help you begin, but not with money. He frowned. What do you mean? I have a connection at a logistics company. They need a shift supervisor. I can recommend you if you're willing to start from the ground up. Also, my Harbor Fund has a free financial skills course for people who've made mistakes with money. You, I can take it, but I'm not writing any more checks. Silence. Lucas stared, then suddenly shoved his chair back and stood. You think I'm a beggar? I didn't come here to hear a lecture. I just asked for a little help keep your classes. I stayed seated. You have a right to be angry, Lucas. But the truth doesn't change just because you raise your voice. He shook his head, voice breaking. You say I lack humanity, but you're the cold one. You set up a test and sit there judging me. I looked at my son, the man I once held when he feared the dark. Now he feared the light of the truth. Maybe you're right, I said quietly. Maybe I am cold. But cold is the only way I don't get pulled back into the same loop. I don't have the strength to pour more love into a bottomless well. He stood a few seconds more, then turned and strode out. The door swung open, a gust of wind lifting the napkin on our table and twirling it in the air. I didn't follow, not because I don't love him, but because I've learned to let him walk on his own. I sat and sipped the cooled tea. The chamomile was faint but warm, like a gentle hug from myself. Outside, I watched Lucas's figure shrink into the crowd, swallowed by the flow like a grain of sand in the wind. I knew that even if he left angry today, maybe one day he would understand the test wasn't to hurt him, but to help him see his own light. That night I went home and made a simple dinner, fried eggs and vegetable soup. When I set the table, I set only one place and didn't feel lonely. I turned on the lights, opened the Harbor Fund work notebook, and drafted an email to Mason. Mason, thank you for your trust and support. I want to expand the fund next month with a job mentoring program and personal debt management skills. Let me know a meeting time that works. Sandra Whitmore. I hit send and sat looking at the screen. Outside, the apple leaves stirred. Under the moon, tiny new apples were forming. I smiled. Life, even late, still knows how to sprout from what we thought was lost. And I, a mother once left outside a closed door, finally understood. Sometimes to find peace, you have to open the truth, even if it makes others walk away. The next morning, I went back to Marble Square, the place I'd sat after Lucas shut the door on me. The old bench was still there with a thin layer of moss, and on the wood was a carved M+D someone had scratched with a small knife. I sat and took a deep breath. The early air smelled of damp leaves, mixed with coffee from the shop across the street. Everything around around me was almost unchanged. Only the human heart was different. That day, I'd sat on this very bench feeling like a shadow a mother left behind, hands shaking around a phone, hoping her son would call back. Today I sat here, but not to wait for anyone. I sat to say goodbye to an old hurt. I looked at the fountain in the middle of the park, jet still, rose and fell, catching the morning sun. I thought of Daniel, my husband gone more than 10 years. If he were alive, he'd sit beside me, his warm hand on my knee, and say in that familiar low voice, "Don't buy love back, Sandra. Real love never needs a receipt." I smiled slightly. Some words you only understand in the second half of life. I used to think forgiveness meant opening the door, going back, giving again. But no, forgiveness, I realized, doesn't mean opening your wallet. It means dropping the stone in your hand. That stone is resentment, the need to make others understand, apologize, pay. I picked up a fallen leaf at my feet and studied it, dry, brittle, ready to crumble. I pressed gently. It broke into small pieces and fell. Maybe forgiveness is like that, not throwing it away, but letting it turn to dust. That afternoon, I went home and opened my old notebook, the one titled Things to Do Just for Me. On a new page, I wrote a short letter to myself. Sandra, sons grow up, and sometimes they stop being the child in your heart. People change, and we have to learn to grow with the truth. Don't go back for the past. There are only closed doors there. Keep walking, with lighter hands and a steady heart. I put the pen down and felt a notch of lightness rise in me. Maybe for the first time, I was writing not to remember, but to let go. The next week, I returned to the Harbor Fund Center. Mason had just sent a report the fund had been operating a full month. Our volunteers took in more cases, mostly older women abandoned by children or evicted after financial disputes. That day, we met a 72-year-old named Elena, white hair, hands trembling from high blood pressure. She said her only son had taken her entire pension to invest in a project, then disappeared. She'd slept on park benches for 3 nights before someone sent her here. As she spoke, my throat tightened. Every sentence felt like a mirror reflecting my past. The mother pushed out of the home she helped build. I held her hand and said gently, "You're not alone. We'll get you a safe place first." That afternoon, our team found a small room in senior housing. I went with her. It was simple window to a garden, clean bed, fresh sheets. Elena stood still for a long time, then turned and hugged me tightly, tears soaking my shoulder. "Thank you for treating me like a person," she said. I didn't answer, just patted her back. In that moment, my purpose came into sharp focus. Not revenge, not waiting for my son to apologize, but becoming a place where others can be seen, even once. That evening, Mason emailed a report. The Harbor Fund supported 15 cases in its first month. 6 people have stable housing. 3 have part-time jobs. Congratulations, Sandra. Your seed is taking root. I read it with wet eyes. I remembered my hands shaking when I first signed the fund documents. Now, 15 people isn't a big number, but to me, it's 15 doors opened, doors that, at another time, had been closed to me. I took out paper and sat at my desk. I've been painting at night for a while to keep my inner world steady, but tonight I wanted to paint something specific, an open door. I mixed colors and set the brush to paper. A pale yellow morning wash, a door slightly ajar at center, warm light beyond. My hands didn't shake. The strokes were soft and sure. When I finished, I stared for a long time. It wasn't beautiful by any standard, but it held my whole journey from someone left outside a door to someone brave enough to open one for herself. While rinsing the brush, my phone lit up. A message from Lucas. Just a blank line, no words, no emoji, only white space. I stared at it for a moment, then set the phone down. No anger, no hurt, no expectation. Maybe that blank space is the only language both of us can understand right now. I didn't reply. I brewed another pot of tea and carried it to the backyard. The apple tree stood there, leaves gently stirring in the moonlight. A few young apples had grown round and glossy. I reached out and touched the one closest to my hand. It was cool and solid. I remembered what Mason once said, "Any tree that survives winter comes back stronger." I smiled. Maybe people are the same. I went inside, drew the curtains, and lay down. On the table, the open door painting was still drying, the warm light catching the soft washes of color. I listened to the wind at the window, leaves brushing each other like a gentle lullaby. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, sleep came quickly, deep, and without nightmares. No more dreams of a closing door, no more fading footsteps, no more Harper's cold smile or my son saying, "I can't." Only a pale glow at the bottom of the dream where a mother sits by an open door, a hand on the table, peacefully looking out at the garden. The next morning, when the first light slipped through the curtains, I was still smiling in my sleep, because I knew I had truly come through the winter of my life. And this time, peace didn't come from anyone else, but from me. One early autumn morning, as I was making coffee, there was a knock at the door. The mail carrier in a blue jacket smiled and held out a slightly wrinkled ivory envelope. Mail for Mrs. Sandra Whitmore. I was surprised. Who writes letters by hand anymore? After I closed the door, I looked down at the envelope and felt my heart pinch. The slanted handwriting, a little unsteady but familiar, it was exactly Lucas's writing from his high school days when he used to scrawl birthday wishes on cards for me. In the top left corner, I saw a small line, "To Mom, if you still want to read." I sat down, my hands trembling as I opened it. The paper inside wasn't bright white but a faded yellow, the ink smell familiar. I took a breath and began to read. "Mom," I wrote and tore up this letter 5 times before I could send it. "If you're reading this, it means I've stopped running. Harper is gone for good. She cleared out the apartment and took everything, even the watch you gave me when I turned 18. I'm not angry at her anymore. I'm angry at myself for letting things get here. You were right. I didn't fail because I was broke. I failed because I lacked humanity. I blamed you so I could live easier, so I wouldn't have to face myself. When Harper told me you were controlling, I believed her because believing that was easier than admitting I was just weak and dependent. After we met at the cafe, I thought you were cruel. But when I had to pay the rent late, got the power cut, and went to get a loading job at a warehouse outside town, I finally understood how you lived all those years to raise me. My hands bled from carrying heavy boxes. My shoulders hurt so much I couldn't sleep. But with every dollar I got at the end of the week, I felt my self-respect coming back, something I'd lost a long time ago. Now I'm sharing a room with 3 other men in an old place with cracked walls and creaking floors. But at night, when I'm washing dishes, I feel quiet inside. I'm not angry at you anymore, and I don't feel like anyone owes me anything. I started paying off the first debt, not much, just a few $100s, but it's money I earned with my own sweat. I'm not writing to ask for money, don't worry. I just want you to know I'm alive. I'm relearning how to be a decent person, and I'm trying to be someone you can trust again. You once said, chances don't come with cash. I understand that now. A real chance is getting to start over when no one believes in you anymore. I'm asking one thing, not forgiveness right away, just the chance to prove myself with actions. I don't know how long it'll take, but I will do it. Thank you for not rescuing me that time. If you had, I might never have woken up. Your son, Lucas. I sat still for a long time after I finished. Light from the window fell across the page, showing every shaky stroke. Each line felt like a heartbeat, painful and warm. I laid a hand over my chest, a small ache there, but not from the old wound. It was like a scar still present, but no longer making me flinch when touched. I didn't know when I started crying. Tears slipped onto the edge of the letter, blurring a few words, but I didn't wipe them away. I let them soak into the paper, as if returning to Lucas a little of the tears I'd shed for him years ago. For the first time in many years, I cried without bitterness, not from hurt, but because my son was finally looking honestly at himself. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer among old keepsakes: Daniel's wedding ring, Lucas's graduation photo, and a card with the messy words, "Mom, you're my hero." I didn't write back, not out of coldness, but to give us both time. Time for Lucas to prove things with actions, and time for me to learn how to trust without fearing another betrayal. In the afternoon, I went to the Harbor Fund office to see Mason. He was reviewing files for the next round of grants. "I want to prepare the job training program," I said. "We can't just help them find housing, we need to help them find work." Mason nodded and smiled. "I figured you'd say that. I'll set a meeting with the vocational center next week." We discussed launching short courses for older women, basic healthcare, simple bookkeeping, and basic computer skills. I saw Mason's eyes light up as he talked through the plans. When I left the office, I no longer felt like someone searching for meaning, but someone creating it. That evening, I went home, made tea, and stood before the mirror. The light fell across my face, deeper lines now, but steadier eyes. I looked at myself and said slowly, clearly, "I won't abandon myself anymore." The sound carried softly through through the room, bounced off the walls, then faded, leaving a sweet calm inside me. I said it again, louder. I won't abandon myself anymore. My voice didn't shake. It held the weight of someone who'd walked through fire and stayed standing. I turned off the lights and drew the curtains. The night sky over Maple Grove was bright with stars, stitches of light threading the dark. I looked up and whispered, "Thank you, Daniel. You were right. Every storm has its reason." On the table, Lucas's letter lay neatly folded, the corner slightly curled. I didn't know how long it would take for my son to truly change, but I knew at least he had begun. And as for me, I had finished another journey. The journey of forgiving without forgetting, of loving without lowering myself. I sat on the bed and closed my eyes. A cool night breeze slipped through the crack in the window, carrying the scent of ripe apples from the yard. Somewhere out there, maybe, Lucas was looking up at the same sky, pen in hand, writing the next part of the life he'd once lost. I didn't need to be sure of that. It was enough to know that both of us, a mother and a son, were learning to face the mirror without looking down. And in the hush of the night, I smiled. Not the forced smile of someone pretending to be strong, but the smile of someone who had finally found real peace. Peace that didn't come from anyone else, but from her own choices. When winter passed and the snow melted, I realized my life had truly turned a page. I used to wake with emptiness, wondering what reason I had to keep going. Now, every morning began with the Harbor Fund's phone ringing, someone needing help, someone wanting to learn, someone who just found a new job. We had just launched the job training program for women over 60 with 3 main tracks: retail, logistics, and cooking. The idea came one afternoon while Mason and I were reviewing files. I said, "We can't stop at housing. We need to give them a trade so they can stand on their own feet." Mason smiled and nodded. "A hand that lifts is stronger than a bag of money tossed down." We started partnering with local shops, warehouses, and a community culinary center. The first orientation was in a small room lit warm and gold, smelling of toasted bread and orange blossom tea. More than 20 women sat in a circle. Their hair was white, hands lined, but their eyes shone with eagerness. When I stood to introduce the program, they all clapped. The sound woke up something inside me. Each of them carried a story. There was Helen, 67, whose daughter-in-law had once locked her bank account. Now she was learning to be a cashier. Marjorie, 71, who'd been a school cook and wanted to reopen a small eatery. And Dora, 63, who kept smiling despite losing her husband and being abandoned by her children. She was learning to drive a light delivery truck for a Bejo grocery. I saw myself in their eyes, in the clumsy way they held pens to take notes. Trust returned with every smile. In each class, they shared their lives, old wounds, and new hopes. Sometimes the room went silent when someone described being pushed out of her home. Then it would burst into laughter when someone accidentally used sugar instead of salt in her first pot of soup. One morning, watching the group practice moving boxes in the warehouse, I realized the ones who once seemed the weakest become the strongest when they're believed in. I decided to buy a small white van, big enough to haul food and supplies to our sites. When I signed the papers, the clerk asked if I wanted to name it. I thought for a moment and said, "Call it Hope Ride." From that day, the little van became part of my life. Every week I drove it to the food market, loaded up produce, bread, and milk, then delivered everything with our volunteers. On the side of the van, the words, "Hope Ride the Bread." Harbor isn't just a stop, it's a start, made people pause to read. When someone asked, I would smile, because I know what it means to begin again. The small house in Maple Grove wasn't quiet anymore. It had become the afternoon tea spot for the women in our fund. Every Friday, the kitchen filled with laughter, clinking dishes, and the smell of fresh cookies. They called me Big Sister Sandra, even though I was older than some. Someone brought a guitar, someone else told corny jokes. I looked around the table and saw them smiling, their deep lines strangely beautiful. I realized this house had truly come back to life. It wasn't just shelter, it was a rest stop for souls that had been hurt. One afternoon, with laughter still echoing, I looked out at the yard. Golden light covered the old apple tree. On its branches, the first ripe apples glowed in the sun. I thought, even a forgotten apple tree knows how to bear fruit again. The next month, I took a short trip something something I hadn't dared to do in 10 years. I chose Cedar Bay, just a few hours' drive from home. The water was a heart-stopping blue that day. I took off my shoes, stepped onto the sand, and let small waves lap at my feet. The smell of salt and wind moved through my hair, bringing back a freedom I hadn't tasted in a long time. I stood and watched the waves roll in and out. I suddenly felt people are the same. We have to let pain wash in and then wash out, so the beach is clear for trust to grow again. I closed my eyes and whispered to the wind, I forgive one more stretch. Not forgiving someone specific, but forgiving the years I didn't know how to love myself. When I got back, there was an email from Mason. He wrote, Sandra, good news. Lucas just sent confirmation he's held a logistics job for 6 weeks. No new debt, no missed shifts. I think he's truly starting over. I read that line 3 times. The first time, my heart tightened. The second time, I smiled. The third time, my eyes welled but didn't hurt. That evening, Lucas texted, Mom, I signed up to volunteer at the fund's food warehouse this Sunday. No special treatment. I just want to help. I understand you don't need words now, only actions. I sat for a while, then replied briefly, the fund's rule is clear. Anyone who needs a skill gets to learn. See you Sunday at the warehouse. I hit send, calm. Not because my son had come back, but because the circle had closed. That Sunday, the warehouse was busier than usual. Heavy boxes were stacked neatly, and the air buzzed with laughter. I was signing the distribution log when I saw a familiar figure at the end of the aisle, Lucas, in a green volunteer shirt, gloves on, bending to lift a heavy crate of produce. I watched. His back was straight, knees bent, exactly the technique we teach. No one knew he was my son, and I didn't say so. Here, everyone was equal. Givers, receivers, learners, teachers, just open hands. During the break, I brought him a bottle of water. He looked at me, sweat on his brow, his gaze steady. I'm okay, Mom. I just want to do this right. I nodded and said nothing. Inside, only one sentence rang that I didn't need to speak aloud. You've started, and I see it. In the afternoon, as people left, I watched Lucas stack the empty boxes. His shadow stretched long across the sunlit concrete. I smiled. Actions always speak louder than apologies. I knew it might take a long time for our trust to fully refill, but today, at least, the door had opened not with words but with working hands. As I stepped out of the warehouse, the wind moved through my hair with the scent of ripe apples from a nearby yard. I looked up at the late sun gilding the pavement and felt a quiet, inexplicable warmth. I had once been the one who needed rescue. Now, I was the one rescuing not just others, but the very son who had once hurt me. 3 months later, as the maples in the yard began to turn gold, I got another envelope from Lucas. Not a handwritten letter this time, but a tidy packet with a small note. Mom, I want you to know I'm trying for real. Not to win back your trust, but to become someone you can be proud of. Inside was a personal budget, rent, groceries, weekly savings, and a completion certificate for the Harbor Fund's financial skills class. I turned each page and saw the instructor's signature at the end. My hands trembled, but from emotion, not doubt. For the first time in years, I saw my son truly standing on his own feet. 3 days later, Lucas called. His voice was still low and careful, but there was something I hadn't heard before. Humility. Mom, could I visit this weekend? I'm not asking for anything. I just want to invite you to dinner. I'll cook. I smiled. Okay, but fair warning, I still remember the smell of that burned chicken you made when you were 15. On the other end, he laughed real, light, a little embarrassed. I know how to control the heat now, Mom. On Sunday evening, Lucas showed up at my door with a basket of groceries. The smell of stew and bread filled the living room. He set the table himself and placed a small vase of wild daisies in the center, the kind I like. When we sat down, I looked at him and saw new lines at the corners of his eyes, the marks of work and growing up. We ate in quiet for a while. No long apologies, no tears, just the soft clink of cutlery on plates. Near the end of the meal, Lucas laid down his fork and looked up. Mom, I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I know trust can't be rebuilt with a few words. I just want you to know I'm patient. I'll prove it by living better, day by day. I looked into my son's eyes. No more dodging, no more illusions, just simple, steady truth. I reached across the table and rested my hand on his. Lucas, I said softly, I respect your effort. The boundary between us still stands, but the bond hasn't gone anywhere. We'll take it step by step, slow and steady. No one has to kneel to be loved. We just need the courage to stand together." He nodded. In the soft evening light, I saw him not a lost boy, but a man who could bow to his mistakes and lift his head to the future. When he left, I stood in the doorway and watched. His brown coat faded into the dark. I gently opened the door wider and let the night air in. A cool breeze slid through my hair, tugged the curtain, and carried the scent of dry leaves. I realized doors open from the inside are always warmer, because this time I wasn't opening it to let someone in, but to welcome my own peace. The next morning, I went to Mason's office. We sat at the familiar small wooden table with a fresh stack of papers between us. "I want to sign an addendum," I said. "Increase the budget for job training. There are so many waiting." Mason pushed up his glasses and smiled. "Mrs. Sandra, I have to say it, you're blooming." I laughed. "If I can still bloom at this age, I'm lucky." He said, "No, it's because you're not waiting for someone else to water you anymore." After we signed, I looked at the line that read Harbor Foundation, Phase 2, and felt my eyes sting. From a woman left on the curb, I had become someone who writes first chapters for others. That evening, I brewed jasmine tea and opened the notebook that once read Things to Do Just for Me. On the last page, I added a closing line. $5 million can't buy family, but it bought myself back. I no longer live to be loved. I live because I know I deserve love. I closed the notebook and set it by the window. Moonlight slipped through the glass and laid a silver glow across the cover. Outside, the old apple tree was heavy with fruit again. I thought that if Lucas keeps standing steady, maybe one day when autumn comes, we'll pick apples together, laugh, and remember what we've been through, not with a stab, but with gratitude. Family is like that apple tree. It can lose branches and drop leaves, but if the roots hold, it can still sprout. I don't know what the future will bring, but for the first time in years, I don't need certainty. I just know that, slow and steady, every crack will one day be filled with light. Night fell, and I took my tea out to the porch. The air was cool but not biting. I sat in the old wooden chair and looked up at the starry Maple Grove sky. The stars winked like tiny needles stitching the dark, as if to say every journey is worth it as long as we still believe in kindness. I sipped the hot tea, the slight bitterness easing into sweetness on my tongue. Life is like that, you pass through bitter to arrive at sweet. I sat a long time, until the night grew so quiet I could hear the leaves touch. In that moment, I knew I'd close this story not with a slammed door, but with a truly open one. A chapter ended, without tears, only warm light shining from simple things, compassion, boundaries, and gratitude. Thank you for staying with me to the very end of my story. I'm Sandra, 68. If you're still listening, I believe you've carried your own wounds, maybe not like mine, but you've known loneliness, being forgotten, or having to be stronger than you thought. I want to ask you, where are you listening from? What city, what room, or maybe a quiet evening like my own once was? Leave a comment and tell me where you are, and what part of this story touched your heart the most. Every comment is a warm hand clasp not only for me, but for thousands of mothers and fathers learning to stand back up after hurt. If you believe anyone can begin again, please hit like, subscribe, and share this video so the story doesn't stop with me, but keeps spreading like a circle of healing.